Hey friends, welcome to week two. This is the lectures for week two. So what I'm going to be doing is breaking up this lecture into about 4 or 5 different smaller lectures, somewhere between 5 and 8 minutes long. That way you can sort of break up your watching so that you're not trying to take in a 30-minute lecture all at one setting. So before we move on to the conversation on the missional church, which is where we're headed, I want to first kind of go back to where we were last week as we sort of set the stage in talking about missional theology. You read Goheen's book. I appreciate your reflections upon that. Some of you didn't get it till late, so you're kind of still working through some of the material. I'd really, really encourage that you continue to make your way through the material in Goheen's book. Go ahead and finish that book. There are a few of the books that are shorter reads and will be quicker for you, so you'll have time throughout this course to knock that book out. But I really want to encourage you to finish the book if you have yet to finish the book. But we ended last week's lecture on talking about sort of a missional hermeneutic, and I wanted to come back to that just for a few moments today because I think it's really important for us to re-engage. So we talked about hermeneutics being the art of making sense. How is it that we interpret and communicate what we interpret to others? Now, this idea of hermeneutics extends beyond just text, but last week we talked specifically about text. We talked about a way of reading and interpreting the text through the lens of the Missio Dei. And we kind of aligned out with Goheen the full story of God's Missio Dei from Genesis to Revelation, from the garden to the city. And we looked at the ways in which the missional community of God is a part of God's plan of blessing for the world. And you talked about in many of your reflections that just putting on that lens is already beginning to reshape how you're thinking about your church, your context, and where you are, and even your engagement in your posture in the world. But there's another key part of hermeneutics that I want to talk about, because hermeneutics is not just my engagement with the text. Hermeneutics also has to do with making sense of my own place in life. Hermeneutics recognizes that each one of us has been shaped by a set of circumstances and experiences, and that we all carry within us implicit biases, prejudices, preconceived ideas, and presuppositions. Someone who does hermeneutics well has learned to confess the place in which they stand, because the place in which you stand is the place from which you read text. And so you ultimately end up interpreting text through the lens, not only of a missional hermeneutic, but also through the lenses of your previous experiences, who you are, what you've experienced, what you've encountered in life. And so being able to identify. So for instance, let me share this. Okay, so I am a white middle-class male American. When I come to text, I've got to be aware of the ways in which my life experience, my personal hermeneutic posture impacts and affects how I read the text. There are times in which I might read the text through a lens that's not faithful to the text because I'm interpreting it through my experience. I would say this happens in the church a lot of the times. We don't even realize the ways in which our privileges inform our engagement with the text, which ultimately, because we're a people of the text, affects and influences our postures to the communities around us as we try to make sense of that text through our lives in our engagement with the other. And so part of the hermeneutic endeavor is your ability to confess, make sense of, and name your particular place. One of the reasons why I had you do that essay on the front end, what's your missional context? Because I want you to be aware of where it is that you're standing as you're reading this material. You're not just reading this material for any sake. You're reading this material through a set of lenses because right now, at some level, you're in the fray. And when you are in the fray of ministry, that fray of being in the ministry informs the way you engage the material that we're going to be talking about throughout. Um, one of the challenges that I have found in pastoring over the years is that people aren't always aware of the limited horizons that they have when they engage the Christian faith, when they engage the text of Scripture, and when they engage the other or those who are different than them. See, we all have a horizon. We can only, so think about it. You look out and you can only see so far. And I think certain sets of experiences or limits in our experiences can diminish the width of horizon. And I think critical thinking, like we're doing in this course, making yourself more and more aware of the places in which you stand, engagement with those in the class whose experiences are different, engaging the texts that are going to force you to reconsider some of your postures, has a way of expanding horizons. It makes you better at hermeneutics so that when you come to a text for the sake of your congregation, or when you're trying to bear that text out for the sake of your community, you have run that through a set of filters in which your horizons have expanded and your ability to make sense of the text isn't as limited by the scope of your subjective place. It's not that you're not aware of your subjective place or your posture in the world. It's just that now, by the grace of God and your experiences and your critical thinking and your conversations and even your dialogue, debate, and arguments has helped to expand the limited horizons that we face every single day. So we're going to be talking a lot about hermeneutics throughout this whole course, and trying to make sense of the text in relationship to our congregation and to the other that we serve. And so I wanted to just take a few moments on the front end to sort of re-engage hermeneutics to make sure that we are all on the same page. One of the most beautiful passages for me about the way in which Paul understood hermeneutics is that passage in which he makes these statements. He says, though I am free, I belong to no one. I've made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I've become all things to all people so that by all possible means I might save some. To do this all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. One of the beauties of Paul was he was consistently aware of the places in which he stood, the people to whom God had sent him. He was aware of his own story and the way that his story had sometimes limited his frame of reference. Growing up as a Pharisee would have shaped his worldview a certain way. His disruption with Jesus impacts that worldview as a Pharisee. However, he's got to be consistently aware of the ways in which that is constantly at work in the back of his operating system of his heart and mind, and he has to be willing to call those things into question when they arise. And so that's the first little bit of today's lecture, and I just wanted to take a few moments and share with you the importance of hermeneutic awareness, not only how we engage the text, but also where we stand to engage the text for the sake of the people that we interpret the text for, and then also how we bear that out in our interactions with the other. So that's lecture one. That's part one of week two, our lecture for the day. I will have a follow-on with part two in just a few moments.